All right, so we are here doing the thing. No need to reschedule, guys. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, dude.
So we're on the Talking Shop podcast, sharing stories, lessons, and experiences in sports performance and professional development. Mike Sullivan, Illinois State University performance coach, baseball, track, swim, on for his 2.5 episode as he guest hosted once and was a guest
that's
once.
right.
Yes, 2.5. And Hunter Eisenhower, Arizona State University performance coach, men's basketball. I can't forget about triathlon, obviously.
Triathlon,
Here
baby.
for
National champs.
Hey, get that ring though. On for a 2.0 episode. So here to compare and contrast as we all have changed t-shirts a lot of recently in our jobs, roles, sectors, whatever it may be. So tell me what's going. Oh, hosts, I guess your podcast is new since we've hopped on. Move the needle. So tell me about how you doing? Something good that's going on in your life, and you can plug MTN really quick, and then we'll get into it.
Go ahead, Hunt.
Man, something good in my life. I think that there's a lot that is going really good in my life. I think that obviously having a 1.5-year-old daughter is up there on the list, number one. That's been amazing to be able to experience being a dad for the first time. I also think that, and I've said this before, maybe on another podcast or maybe on social media or something, but I have like texts in my phone from around this time last year talking about college jobs back when I was with the Kings, like just knowing that I probably wanted to end back in college. And I've screenshot texts in my phone saying that Arizona State was like a dream job for me. So every time I like walk out onto our court or even just like wear Arizona State gear, it's just so surreal to me that like it actually happened and came to fruition. So I truly feel blessed to work here every single day. And then, yeah, Move the Needle has been a fun project that me and Mike have started a couple months ago. And our original idea was a podcast. And then we decided that we wanted to try to do more with it and create a business. We actually just filed for our LLC. That's going through. Yeah, so we're close to being official. We're writing programs, doing some online programming for some different clients, and yeah, it's been a fun process, and it's been a little bit more time consuming than I thought it was going to be, but it's all stuff that I and we enjoy doing, so it's been great.
And the answer is yes. I will headline your first seminar, symposium, whatever you decide to call it. So
that's welcome. The other thing coming down. Yep, it's coming up soon is the first annual Move the Needle Performance Symposium. So we're excited about that too. That's still in the works.
Oh, I didn't know that, but the answer is still yes.
It is coming online.
Yeah, we're working on it in the background.
You want to hear about the biggest contrast of just lives possible is Hunter's answer, and then I'll give you my answer. Now, literally the first thing I thought of when you said like, what's something that's going on that's good in your life? I bought a couch today. That was pretty good. You know, Hunter's like, I had a child. I'm like, I can't say.
Is your bed on or off the floor right now?
My bed's good. I've got my bed. I bought my bed a week ago. Got a nice, what is that called? What is it called? Bed frame. A nice bed frame.
What size bed? King bed?
It's queen bed. No,
okay.
King bed. Solid. Bought a couch today. So a lot of good things going on. Although it feels wildly inadequate once Hunter was like, "Oh, I had a child."
Hey, to each their own, man.
Hey, man. Everybody's got victories in their lives. You got to stack them up.
Everybody's got some. But yeah, Moving Needle's been going really well. And like Hunter said, we just dropped our first online program, our speed and elasticity program that we released last week. Is that right, Hunter? Last week?
Yep.
And now we have our sights set not only on continuing to try to put together the best podcast we can, but also now thinking about our conference/symposium that we're going to put on at the tail end of May, kind of post most baseball season, for a handful of speakers and hopefully as many people as we can get.
Sweet. So I personally hate when banter lasts too long on podcasts, so I'm going to cut right to the point. So Hunter went from UC Davis, where he met Mike, and Mike was at UC Davis, where he met Hunter. And then Mike made his way to TCBoost, where he unfortunately met me, and he wanted to give the private side a go. And then Hunter went from UC Davis to the Sacramento Kings to do pro basketball, and Mike went from TCBoost to Illinois State to get back in college. And Hunter went from the Kings to Arizona State to get back in college. So that's how we all know each other. And the point of this podcast. So, Mike, thank you for the segue, comparing and contrasting your life to Hunter's. We're going to compare and contrast all of the kind of different sectors and journeys and a very high turnover field. I thought it was an interesting kind of trio, kind of all of our journeys so far, even in the last, 2 years, So basically, why did you want to switch from each role to the next, and kind of what was the thought process? And for context, sorry, before we start, each job and experience and company, whatever it is different and unique, and there's positives and negatives and pros and cons. There's probably more similarities than dissimilarities, but it's here just to share like your personal experiences, not necessarily talk trash or try to sway someone a certain way, kind of just share our experiences. So with that being said, who wants to take it away? Kind of like, what was the thought process and the why kind of when going from spot to spot / sector to sector?
I'll start. So I guess going from Davis, starting at Davis, and then going to TCBoost. So I guess the college to pro, which we talked about on the previous episode. So I'll make it really brief. But being in California, so A was just the personal stuff where I had, personal relationships that were in the Midwest that I wanted to be closer to. And it didn't make it easy being in Sacramento. And then the professional part of deciding that speed development to me was more and more important. I just wanted to explore that more deeply. And then just the timing of my conversation with Steve, who ended up offering me that job at TCBoost to come back. So that worked out really well. And I was like, okay, I'll just give this at least a year and just dive into it and see how I like it. And I loved it. And I love private, and I've always imagined myself eventually being in private long term. I never thought that like college was like the long term solution for myself. I thought it was gonna be private, but it just happened way earlier than I thought it was going to happen. And so the 2 years that I was at TCBoost were super impactful, and the most impactful 2 years I've had as a coach. But I knew that I had left college before I thought I was going to. And at the end of my time at TCBoost, I had, again, more personal stuff, but also just the professional side was I had the opportunity to stay. I had a couple of different private positions that I could have taken or been a part of that would have been really, really good positions. But in my head, if I had taken those positions, I was never going to come back to college. So I was like, okay, if I don't do this now, go back to college now, then I'm never going to do it ever. So let me just apply myself in a way that I think I can, that I've now grown privately. Let's apply it to the college sector. And if in a year I hate it and I'm like, man, private was really what it was about, then I can always go back. But I felt like I had to see at least one more experience collegiately through before I felt good about, hey, private's the place I want to go. So that's why I came back to Illinois State. And
Mike,
every time, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Since we host our own podcast, I like naturally am thinking of questions when you're speaking. And one of the questions that I've had, and I know we've talked about your experience at Illinois State a little bit, and you kind of showed up before a break, so you probably haven't got like a true taste of what it'll be. But do you think that like your itch that you wanted to scratch is being satisfied at Illinois State to this point of like, wow, it feels good to be back in college, and run groups with teams and be back in that environment? Or do you find yourself thinking about the environment and coaching opportunities that you had at the private facility? And maybe it's too early to tell, because again, you showed up right before a break, but do you find yourself being like, man, it feels good to be back in college? Like, have you had that thought running groups?
It's a great question. There are parts about private that I miss for sure, but there are parts about private that I'm very thankful that I don't have to deal with anymore. And there are parts about college that I like way more, but again, like similarly, there's parts about college that I wish I didn't have to deal with. So was it like, oh, this is 100% the right thing? I think again, like it's too early to tell, because what I've done so far is not indicative of what this job actually is. Because I got here a week before Thanksgiving break. I basically like haven't worked with any teams in a month. So I don't have a really good answer yet, but I think no matter what, like we said, it's not that one is better than the other, but there just is differences in both.
I think that's a
And
good point. And Hunter, I think you should probably host a podcast. That was a solid question.
yeah, good. That's a good
But
follow up, Hunter.
where that's what I was kind of battling when I was looking to get into college. And a good lesson where it's like you're not going to solve all of the problems. And I mentioned this way too many times on this podcast, Dr. John Weigel at Notre Dame now, where there's positive challenges, the things that you want to learn and grow and get better at, the negative challenges, right? The cons, we'll call it, and what you find fulfilling in a job. And I think when you think, oh, this sector, this new job, or this different college, whatever it may be, is gonna like get rid of all of the cons, they just look different, you know?
Yeah.
So I think just having a realistic expectation about like when switching or pursuing a new job is like it's getting rid of those existing cons, but it's just trading it for different ones, you know?
Yeah.
And then I have two follow-up questions to that. So when did you know that speed was something that you wanted to do, or was that because you had a connection to TCBoost and they did speed? Slash, you had mentioned that like you knew you were going to do private eventually. So what was it about private that was always in the back of your mind?
I think like the goal, without being able to like put or identify it exactly, was I wanted to eventually work for myself, and I didn't want to have to work for other people. And so I was like, that sounds like something that I can do privately. Not that you can't do it collegiately, you can get to that point, I think, for the most part, collegiately, where you have pretty much full autonomy and whatnot. But it just always felt like eventually I wanted to be in that situation where I could work for myself. I could kind of split my time how I want to split my time. And it just felt like that would be private. I would say that the reason that it became a speed minded focus was because I guess while we were at Davis, it was just like, it was 800 student athletes, and we had an 8-rack weight room and 2,000 square feet,
Down like 3 coaches.
you know? And so it was like, and I talked about this before on different podcasts, but like, if you're going to spend time, if you could spend time away from the weight room, we were going to spend time away from the weight room, you know? Now they have a beautiful weight room, as I understand. I've never actually seen it. Hunter can talk more about that, but if you're going to spend time away from the weight room, you spend time away from the weight room. I was like, this just seems more important. And that just coincided just perfectly with talking with Steve and him being like, hey, like, we're hiring over here. This is all we do. I was like, shoot, like maybe this is something to just really go dive down. And so I was like, let's dive down this. And that was, 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago.
Wild. Very cool. So Hunter, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I guess my transitions were dictated by a couple different things. I think early in my career, I would be dishonest to say that there wasn't a little bit of ego driving me to like continue to move up, quote unquote, move up the ranks within this field.
Not in our field. No egos.
one of my first internship experiences, which I'm actually in Seattle right now, so it's kind of nostalgic, but was at the University of Washington with football, and just seeing those guys as like the cream of the crop of strength and conditioning coaches working at the Power 5 level with a big time football program was like something that I like wanted to get to myself. And since I left there, it was always my goal early in my career to make it back to the University of Washington to work with football.
And it was also a great staff at the time.
Yeah, and it was like the most phenomenal staff I could have ever learned under and worked for. So I think early in my career, like there was a sense of like I want that prestige. And I got married at really early in my career, like the first semester of my GA position. Me and my wife Leah got married, and things started to like transition when we started thinking about like having a family. And I went from like wanting to have the coolest looking position on paper to trying to create a position that allows me to like do what I want in terms of coaching and from a professional setting, but not also give up so much time with my family that I like lose that aspect of things. Because I think that early on in my career, you hear about strength and conditioning coaches and they have to work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and travel every weekend. And it's like, wow, for some people that might be fulfilling and what they want. For me, especially now with a young daughter, like I want to spend as much time with her as I can, while I also want to pursue something I'm very passionate about. And when I was at UC Davis, and my wife was pregnant, I was thinking about the realistic possibility of staying in that role long term, from a financial perspective and also from like a time perspective. And it just didn't make sense to me because and Mike can attest to this, that like you worked a lot of hours at UC Davis. Like we all worked with football. So you were there at 5:30 a.m. setting up, and then we all had our own teams. Mike was up to like friggin' 9 teams at once. Granted, I had men's basketball, so it allowed me to have a little bit less teams, but also it was full go with football, full go with men's basketball, and I still had baseball and lacrosse. So it was a full schedule, and I knew that I needed to make a change, both upgrade in terms of financial things that I could provide for my family, but also like a schedule that was a little bit more um understanding. So the Kings opportunity presented itself, and while that schedule didn't really allow for more time, it allowed for me to learn and add something to my resume that I knew could be attractive down the line. So moved to the Kings position. We started training camp in October. My daughter was born October 11th, so it was just like she was born, and I moved right into training camp and started traveling. So the first 6, 7 months of her life, I was gone a ton. And I just knew that being in professional basketball wasn't going to be the long-term solution. And me and my wife talked about it, and it was like, could I do this for another year? Yeah. Do I want to do this for another year? Probably not, because I don't want to give up the second year of my daughter's life traveling and stuff. So toward the end of the season, we began to have a conversation of like, okay, if a good basketball or a college basketball job presents itself, like I'm going to jump at it. And I actually went through an interview process with another school, didn't get it, but who they hired was Daniel Marshall from Arizona State. And this position opened up, and it just like happened naturally to where I went through that whole process to not get it. And then 3 days later, get offered the Arizona State job and ended up here. And it's been a role that is as close as I think I'm going to find to what I described earlier. Something that allows me to like do what I'm passionate about and work with basketball players and be at an awesome university, but also allows me a little bit less travel and a little bit more time to spend at home with my family. So again, like I said earlier in the podcast, I feel super blessed to be in this role and have it work out the way it had over the past 2 years is God's hand in everything for sure.
Which is also a good lesson that like just as life changes, like what type of job you would want can also change. Like having a job like this where I'm actually really looking forward to baseball season and traveling and being gone Thursday to Sunday and going to a different city, like I would assume as a father, probably not like the top of your radar, you
Yeah.
know? So like to do a job like this where, living that bachelor life, like I have the ability to, and you said, Mike, like getting back into college before you don't or can't or won't want to. But I guess the follow-up would be
Well, what's
as
your shindig?
my shindig, about the transition. So TCBoost for 3 years. I really enjoyed. So the context was I really enjoyed my time at TCU being a GA, doing sports science, not with athletics, but I had sports teams. I was basically kind of like a consultant, I guess. So I really liked the team, the school spirit. Like it was interesting. I never wanted to go to a big school and like be just one of the thousands of kids in the stands, but like being a part of the team I really, really enjoyed. It was just so objective, the bigger picture of like winning in the university and the team. And you have that consistency aspect of like seeing them a lot. And the age group I like, 18 to 22. But I was an intern at TC Boost for 2 summers. I was an intern 1 summer and then part-time 2 summers. And I had these big, big plans, and COVID said, nah, you can move back home. And it all works out how it should. TC Boost had a full-time salary and they were still in business for me. So no complaints. And then just, you know, the beauty of the private side and Steve and Tommy as my two ex-bosses of if you want to leave here positively, use this job and make it whatever you want it to be, So to have speed as the competitive edge, but the encouragement of like, all right, well, as long as you do your best here, like you're not going to be here forever. So ball out. So I think doing a job like this where there is a little bit of the clout, right? Like we can just call it what it is, like the TC Boost Rocket versus the Northwestern End looks different, you know? So I think where things mean a little bit more, as Mike can attest, like I trained little Johnny whose mom forced him to go, and I trained a CFL veteran wanting to go out, on a really high note at the end of his career and everything in between, versus like we're all here to play baseball at a super high level And I'm really enjoying working with the swim team as well. Like I have one kid who made the Olympic trial cut, others that are hopeful and whatnot. Um, so I think just to have that objective kind of bigger picture of winning and that mentorship where you can train at a very high level, but also they're still growing as adults. So I thought it was like a perfect kind of combo of all of the things. Now, of course, there's cons as well. But at this point in my life, which is wild that like you're married and have a kid, and my twin brother is also married and says my wife, and it's always weird whenever he says that. And I'm just over here living the bachelor life, right? But to do and pursue a job like this while I can / want to, and like, for example, as I've been thinking about my why, as my why has changed at TC Boost as it is now at Northwestern, of I want to make a life that I can say yes to. And I guess that this will get kind of deep, but like it sucks when my brother would text me, "Oh, hey, mom and dad are in town. I didn't want to ask you because I knew you'd be coaching." And it's like 3.5 hours away, where it's like there's things that I have to say no to now that I don't want to say no to later, you know? So what can I do when I'm at Northwestern now, building up my brand, just becoming a super, super good coach, et cetera, to where I can go back to the private side, right? I can make income through my YouTube. I can make income coaching clients online, building up my exercise library. So when I do pursue online coaching more, I actually don't have any right now, but if I choose to pursue that, I'll have everything filmed and organized and stuff like that. Um, this is
I think that
yeah, sorry.
one thing I was going to say is I think that like within this field, and we were kind of touching on this before we started recording, but I think within this field, that idea of like creating something outside of like your team's environment is so like shunned and looked down on from other coaches and like traditional strength and conditioning. And like I think with the prevalence of social media recently, more coaches are trying to do that. And I've always thought, why wouldn't you try to create a little bit more stability for yourself with some of these other avenues, like a podcast, like online programming? And I think a lot more coaches are doing it now. But I think that tradition would say, like, you can't do that. Like, I'm sure older coaches probably look down on that aspect of things, but that's what we're trying to do with Move the Needle. If that can provide some stability within our lives and create another avenue that we can go down full speed, then like why wouldn't we try to create that using the platform that we have?
And I won't speak for you guys, but like is Move the Needle like recharging? Do you find it refreshing and new?
Yeah.
And like it gets you going in different ways? Like how awesome is it to like ask someone to join the pod versus like, hey, can I steal an hour of your time with a phone call?
Yeah.
You know? So it's like yourself this was a staff meeting at TC Boost where it was like, what content are you pursuing? I was like, oh, I actually don't like read that much or listen to too many podcasts. And I think it was Steve. He said, like, dude, you do the most of any of us. You talk to anyone and everyone, and you're always like networking and doing stuff like that. And I do learn a lot from like my phone calls and stuff. And I've said this before of the harder I try to leave TC Boost, and again, leave in a positive way, right? Like TC Boost was never the end goal. Tommy and Steve said, hey, if you're here for more than like a year or two, like it's either going really good or really bad. The harder I try to leave, the better coaching I did, the better my it was like some bigger picture that like everything had to be clicking, right? In the facility, outside the facility, et cetera, et cetera.
I feel like the thing that you hear oftentimes is, oh, I won't pursue this other thing outside of my, let's just say, like my college residency job, because I don't want to detract from the quality of whatever that S&C thing is, right? Like you hear that all the time. And which I think is actually the opposite, because yes, you spend time, like I spend a lot of time now on Move the Needle stuff. And Hunter and I had this conversation about, we feel like every day is like, there's just like more of a job every single day, you know? And we could probably, if we needed to, we could fill a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday with just Move the Needle stuff. But it's like that time and effort that we spend in the Move the Needle makes me better at the job that I actually do for Illinois State. You know, like the podcast that we have, and we just had this conversation last month because we were going through the process of recertifying our CEUs for our CSCS and whatnot.
Classic.
And we were like, why can't we put down the fact that we just had, we've done 28 episodes that are all an hour long of continuing education with our podcast, and like the things that we take from that we've applied, like that I've applied to my job that have made me a better coach is like, That's 28 hours of like super, super valuable time that I've spent. And then just like relationship wise, when I took the job at Illinois State, the number of people that we had on as guests who then reached out to me and were like, hey, like what's going on? Like, let's like congratulations and whatnot. And those were just like connections that I had simply because of the podcast and what we did with that. So it's like if there's ever a reason to do something more, it's just to help you do better at the main thing, and maybe the main thing for us eventually becomes move the needle, but like right now it just helps us do better at, for Hunter, Arizona State, for me, Illinois State, and I'm sure for you, the stuff that you're doing, your YouTube channel and your podcast and your articles, like that makes you a better coach for the people at Northwestern.
And I think this was as half the stuff I steal from Steve, of like, how great would it be where like at TCBoost, my social media is popping, yours is popping, Steve's is popping, where it just attracts better coaches because they see all the good stuff we're doing, right? If it just like attracts the kind of coaches that you want to work with or whatever it may be. And I actually had a job interview with Ron McKeefery a few years ago, and he was just talking about how people give him a hard time because he has like 2 books, and on his like Washington football bio, it says like 2-time best-selling author. It's like some coaches golf, I just write 500 words a day. Like, what's like the argument of you have to coach at a high level. Well, does that mean that you're doing literally 24/7 your S&C job? So what's the difference if you hop on Fortnite and I record a podcast?
Yeah,
It's just like,
I would
for
think about
me, it
that.
has to be relative to my job because I can't let myself like, I just like work a lot and I like what I do. And like mine is just visible in public and yours is just not?
Yeah, I think about that like when we were back at Davis and Move the Needle wasn't running, or even with the Kings, like I would try to fill my time with reading or a course or whatever, but it's inevitable that you're gonna have periods of like distraction, whether it's your phone or you just end up scrolling. But with the way my life is set up right now, with my home life, with Arizona State, and with Move the Needle, my day is full with productive things. Whether it's being a dad and husband, whether it's working at Arizona State, or whether it's Move the Needle, I don't really have time to like do other things. And that productivity, I think, is very important to what you just said. Like, I don't care what strength and conditioning job you have within this field, you cannot and you do not fill your time 24/7 with things dedicated to your team. Okay, so what do you do with the time outside of that time that you're dedicating to your team? And to your point, yeah, a lot of people turn their brain off and do mindless things, or you can pour yourself into another hobby that's productive or business like what we have going too.
And this stuff like makes me excited, you
Yeah.
know? The chance to like connect with good people and et cetera, et cetera. So very cool. I guess that was a nice little tangent about like the brand and
Plus, if it can
podcasts.
make you money too.
All right, so a nice little tangent and a second tangent, but I guess we kind of talked about like why you switched, what was missing,
Mhm.
and I think it'd be interesting to hear like one thing that is scratching that itch or satisfying a desire that wasn't being met before, and one thing where you thought it might have been, but it's also like not satisfying, or one of those cons. Not to talk trash, but like just to be real about like there's pros and cons to every job. So, when you switched, what's cutting it for you? And then also like one thing that you could take it or leave it.
Yeah, I would say for me, from a professional standpoint, looking at what I was doing from a day to day when it came to training in professional basketball, whether it was the G League or the NBA, it just felt limited. And I continued to question how much. I was trying to think of something else to say, but I can't. So I'm just going to say it. How much am I actually moving the needle with my athletes? Because the training that you do in professional basketball is frequent, which is great. And you can talk about like microdosing and the power behind that. But I felt like what I was doing, I just didn't know if it was like really, I think it was making a difference. I don't want to say it wasn't making a difference
It's
because
a different difference,
it's a different, yeah. And
like
I think that the difference I want to make and I feel most fulfilled by is like big physical transformations and improving KPIs and those things. And some people may argue like, well, that's not the most important thing. But in my opinion, I love doing that stuff. I love the science behind that. And I just felt like professional basketball just doesn't give you the time or the access to the guys. And they have so much autonomy that I wasn't fulfilled by the training that I was able to prescribe. And I'd had the knowledge of what college offered at UC Davis, and I wanted to get back to that. So now getting to the college space, I do get to train these guys a lot. I do get access to them a lot. I do get to create whatever schedule I want, train them however much I want, which is amazing. But I think that the landscape of college basketball is beginning to shift, especially at the Power Five level. And now with NIL and the transfer portal. When I was at UC Davis, while I wasn't there for somebody's 4-year career, typically you would get a guy that you could develop for 4 years, maybe 5 years if they redshirt. At this level, at this current time in college basketball, you probably don't. You're probably with a person for 1-2 years, then they transfer, or maybe you get a grad transfer that plays a year and then leaves. So I think that the prolonged physical development over the course of a career probably isn't as prevalent as what I would love and how it was in college basketball a few years ago. But I still, if we're just looking in a vacuum of like a year blocks, I still get so much access to these guys, which is great. But you just don't get the year after year transformation that you get at a lower level or a couple years ago.
And I think that that's a good point, that especially like pro, you know, all like fancy and looks good and whatnot, where it's like it is a difference, but it's almost like you're just there to not break them or just keep them going, which is a challenge in and of itself. You know, like I think developing an 18-year-old versus like not breaking a 30, 35-year-old, 25-year-old vet making millions and millions of dollars is just as challenging, and if not scarier. It's just a different kind of challenge, right?
Yeah, I was listening to a Just Fly podcast with one of the most recent ones with Keith Barr talking about like tendon health and stuff, and he was talking about how whenever you get athletes that are at like peak performance and extremely springy and just like very stiff, you want to train them in a way that like trains the other side of the spectrum in terms of like making sure that their tissues stay healthy. And then if you have the opposite, where somebody's like very compliant, not very springy, not very fast, not very explosive, you train them in more of like a performance mindset. And I feel like a lot of athletes, when they get to the NBA level, obviously they're closer to that like pinnacle performance. So you do train them in more of like a preventative nature. Whereas in the college setting, you get an 18-year-old that's never trained in their life, and you can just push them for performance because they've never trained before and they can get a lot out of what you do. And it's not to say that type of training to reduce the likelihood of injury and focus on like the quality of tissues and things like that isn't exciting to me, but I think that like pushing the envelope in terms of performance is what really gets me going. And I think that you just get a better opportunity to do that.
Did you have an idea that that's how it was going to be in pro before you got there, or that was more of like a light bulb once you were actually in it?
I mean, I think that's what you hear about professional sports is you get a bunch of Ferraris and you just want to make sure that their wheels don't fall off. And don't get me wrong, like especially over the off season, like we had right before I got this job, we were going through an off-season block, and like both Fox and Keegan Murray stuck around, and those guys were like training, like they weren't just going in and doing their preventative mobility and then going out to the court. Like they were training, which was great, but that's 10% of their year, 20% of their year. So I think that it was something that I knew, but also just something that day after day after a long season of not really being able to like truly train for performance, just kind of wore on me.
Very cool. Very cool. Next, Michael, what is it about Illinois State that's working and something that kind of just is what it is?
I think that the thing that I was not a super big fan of privately was just the spectrum of ages and ranges. I think in theory it's really cool. You know, like, oh, like you have the opportunity to affect someone as an 8-year-old and as an 18-year-old, and you can see that development long term. So I think theoretically it's like super interesting until you actually are doing it and you're like, wow, like I don't really enjoy working with 8-year-olds that much, you know, and that's just kind of how I am. Just because like my mind was so performance based, and then when you're working with someone who's so young, it's just like it just gets thrown out the window, and it's purely about the experience, which like is fine. But I just felt like there were too many sessions that I was having where I just wasn't concerned enough about the performance, right? Like it just wasn't a big enough priority. So that was something that I felt like I was missing a little bit. And then you would have groups like, you know, you have like the NFL Combine group, and like every single session was like hyper focused, right? So you do get to see all of it, but you know, I almost felt like, okay, I don't know, I feel like I'm throwing out half my hours just because it's all just purely experiential and not performance related. So that was part of why I really enjoy working with like, and this is I'm sure resonating with you because that 18 to 22-year-old range is like a super fun range to work with, especially in college because it's so performance based. But then like you also obviously are worried about the experience, so it's like a great marriage of the two. So that's what I really like about being back in college. And like my first week, right before they went home, was like I had the team 5 days a week, like the whole week that I was here. And it's like I haven't had the same group 5 straight days in 2 years.
Wow.
You know, so it's like that's just so different. And then what's something that I might miss from private, or yeah, something that I would miss. I would say honestly is just like I really like, and I listened to the Kier Wenham Flat Austin Yoakum podcast recently, and they were talking about making money and college and private and pro and all this different stuff. And they were talking about people go to private because the money, like the ceiling of money is so much higher privately, which it typically is. But people like staying in team sport because, you know, you get to be a part of something, as we kind of talked about, that's bigger than yourself almost. Whereas like I kind of view it as you could do both. And that's kind of what we're trying to do actively, is like we're trying to capture the team component of our day-to-day job, but we also have this thing, this private endeavor that we have that is going to hopefully raise the ceiling of our financial situation as well. So I think you can do both. But the one thing that I would say I miss is like when I was at TCBoost, especially early when it was like yourself and it was Steve, and it was like those are the three of us every single day. It was like actively like, hey, what else are you guys doing? Like I know you're doing your day-to-day really well, but what else are you doing? Okay, you're like Matt, like how's your podcast going? Like Mike, like what are you doing that's beyond what you're doing at TCBoost? And like that helped me want to move the needle. That helped me explore other things outside of my day-to-day job. That made me a way better coach. And now back in college, like nothing against my staff here. My staff here is great, but that's just like not the same mindset. You know, they're like, hey, like, how are we going to make sure that our stuff is programmed perfectly? It's like, great, like, let's make sure we do that. But like, what else are we doing, guys? It's like, nothing, you know? So I miss having other people that are around me every single day that are like, hey, what else are we doing? Where else are we trying to improve? Where else are we trying to grow outside of what we're doing every single day? Just because we all knew at TCBoost that in order to be a great coach, like you were just a great coach. It wasn't going to be like, hey, we have to talk about being a great coach every day. Like you were going to do it. You know, that was like our bare minimum. So whereas it's like something that we're trying to get to here. Does that make sense? So
That's a good point, because Mike would tell me about conversations that you guys would have as a staff, and touch on what he just said about you guys talking about like, okay, what more are you going to do with your podcast and Steve's and us trying to create Move the Needle. And that was like the exact opposite of my experience with the Kings. And just in that setting, like we wanted to get Move the Needle off the ground, what, a year ago?
yeah,
Wasn't
literally
it?
January of last year.
You
Yeah,
guys'
January of
fake
last year.
fake Mentateo podcast.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we like wanted to get off the ground, and the Kings told me no. And that's just the policy that they had. They had
Just
other
how they run
staff.
their org, yeah.
Yeah, it's just other staff members wanted to do podcasts in the past, and they just said no. And I 100% understand, because they have a image as a professional organization that they have to keep. And if something's said on a podcast by an employee, that could just get really hairy. But whenever I was in that role and we wanted so bad to begin to release podcasts, and my side was like, can't do it. And Mike's side was like, do more, do more, do more. I was like, like, I wish I had that, because that is like so intriguing to me and exactly what I want. But it just unfortunately was not the case until I got this job.
And then I think 3 days into his job at Arizona State, we released our podcast, something like that.
That you recorded 7 months ago.
That we recorded 7 months ago. Yeah.
Which horrible time to start like this whole podcast because I like start a new role and then it's like, okay, let's move the needle off the ground too. And those first 2 months I was here, it was just
And you have to be a dad too.
yeah, drinking through a fire hose. I felt exhausted, but now I think we're in a good rhythm.
And I think it's also like everything is so connected and it's such a feed forward loop as well. You know, where it's like if I know I have a busy day and I have a podcast, I gotta be like super locked in so I can be on time for that, right? And then if I have to get it out at this time, and then
Yeah.
oh, I'm talking to this person, I want to ask them about this because I'm actually dealing with this problem in my actual job, right?
Yeah.
And then when you know that you have a staff meeting at TCBoost and you know that Steve's gonna ask, hey, what have you been doing? And you haven't been doing anything, you like find something, you know, and then it kind of just all goes from there. And conversations with you guys, you know, like how can you not bring it, you know? So I think like there's just so many positives if you make it so. So kind of cool to hear kind of both sides to your stories about kind of content and outside stuff and now in roles that can either allow you or now allow you to kind of pursue those things. I think super cool. And next question. I'll give context with a conversation. I don't know if this was with Hunter and I on the phone or your episode, but you were talking about your current job, how the only reason you can do it at such a high level is because you had so many teams at Davis, so many athletes that you became a way better coach. And having 25 total athletes with the Kings, right, between NBA and G League. And now you have what, 15 plus, however big triathlon is. If you had only had, let's say, 30 athletes at once the entire time being a coach, you wouldn't have become as high level of a coach you are now, if that's ringing a bell, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
hands
would
down, like
go
at my
ahead.
current spot at Northwestern, working with the 8-year-olds to the pros and working with 1 to literally 100 athletes and everything in between, I'm able to like do everything required of me at a super high level. So not to answer your question for you, but basically each spot that you were at, what was the biggest lesson that you learned that you're like connecting now that it's helping you out?
And I think it was the opportunity to coach because that's probably first and foremost of like refining that skill because that's what we do on a day-to-day basis, and that's obviously my role here. But thinking back to every role that I had, it was the people that I worked for or worked with that I pulled stuff from and now have created the way I do things, the way I think about things, the way I coach, the way I program. It and don't get me wrong, like me and Mike probably spent shoot 6 to 8 hours a day on the floor coaching, if not more at Davis. And those hours were so invaluable. And I think that every young coach should try to get a job that allows you to do that and spend that much time on the floor. But I also think that just thinking about the mentors that I've had and the people that I've worked for and worked with in every stop were so impactful to me. And now that I'm I'm in the process of writing a book about like my force system and everything I like feel every concept subtle drop. But every time I'm like typing in a different concept, I like think about the person that I learned that concept from. Or like
Mm.
every time I'm thinking about there's very few ideas that I have that are original to me. Some are, but most are like at least sparked by a conversation that I've had with like a mentor or a friend. So I think that I've been a lot of places in terms of my coaching roles, but the people that I've worked for, I reflect back on and think, wow, like they have really made me the coach that I am today. Not necessarily the amount of hours that I've spent coaching, well, that was hugely important, but I think it was the people that I've been able to learn from and learn with.
And also when you're typing up a lesson and then you get to a paragraph about like context and nuance, you're like, oh, I remember that training session where that light bulb hit, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
or all of the things that make, I think expertise lies in nuance, right? Someone can say, oh, this is the traditional concept, but here's my spin on it and here's why. I think that's what makes someone like a really engaging speaker or how you just can demonstrate your expertise is you can say, here's my spin and why. Here's this thing we agree, we know, but and then insert anecdote, insert lesson, whatever it may be. So I think all of the things that I do now, likewise, is because I've done it with such a range of athletes. And the beauty of the private side, I can have something on the piece of paper and just scrap it, right? Where you can't really do that in the college side, which is fine. But the ability to listen to a podcast, be like, oh my gosh, I want to do this tomorrow. Like you just have the ability to do that. So yeah, I think there's, if not necessarily in the private side, but I think it should be like mandatory, like 2 years in the private side. So many hours, such a range, like, yeah, super invaluable for me as well. So,
I
not that you
think,
get to make that your answer, but I just remember that comment and that was
yeah,
pretty
yeah.
insightful.
I also think that you can get a taste of that in the team setting when you work a job with a bunch of different teams.
Like a smaller school.
Yeah, you're at a smaller school with a bunch of different teams, and maybe you're working with like not to, my wife hates when I do this, but like rank teams and their importance, but there are higher profile sports
Lower revenue teams.
and lower revenue sports. And I think that you can you need to be, not that you're not hyper focused with everybody. I feel like I have to put a disclaimer on this whole entire comment I'm about to make, but
Hey, just say what you're gonna say, dude. Just say what
I
you're gonna say.
think everybody in this field knows that you have sports that you can be a little bit more free flowing and experiment with a little bit more. And then you have your other sports that you need to be a little bit less experimental with and do the things that you've tested before and know work and do those things. And I think that when you work in a smaller school with a bunch of different teams, you're given the opportunity to kind of experiment in the same way that you just talked about in the private setting. But if you're just trying to chase, I want to work with men's basketball at the highest level, professional, like if you're working professional basketball your whole career, you're not experimenting with anything.
100%.
Very cool.
Except I did experiment with tag.
And you almost
During
got
my
someone
time.
hurt.
Almost got somebody hurt, so that was
Really?
yeah, that was
What
good.
what happened?
So it was it was a pre-practice warm-up last year with the Stockton Kings, the G League team for the Kings. And anybody that works in basketball, well, maybe the people that are way better coaches than me have super high level warm-ups where everybody's locked in 100% of the time, but that's just not the case where I've been. Like it's a little bit more free flowing. Guys got to get going a little bit. Guys are talking. Like it's just set, like whatever it is. But that was the case last year. And I felt like there could just be like a little bit more enthusiasm and intent. So I just started throwing like subtle little games. Like we played dribble knockout, we played sharks and minnows, we just played little games and they went really well. And then those were getting a little stale. So I decided to play line tag, explained it. And surprisingly, a lot of guys hadn't played it before, but we started playing line tag and it's going great. Like guys are flying around laughing, like acting like they're children. And one of our two-way guys is standing on the baseline. So we had two-way players that were both down with Stockton, my like higher priority projects throughout the year. And he's standing on the baseline. One of the other players is running down the sideline, running from the tagger. And he's like running with his head turned from the guy to like see where he's coming. Turns a corner at the baseline, two-way guys like standing underneath the rim, and they just like collide.
Oh.
One of them falls. The whole coaching staff is right there, like, and I just froze, stopped everything, tried to get practice started as soon as possible just to like make everybody forget that happened. So after that day, I no longer played tag. Now, if that happened in a private facility with a bunch of 6-year-olds, it's like laugh, stand up, keep playing.
Yeah.
How many times, like, dude, Tometz was the best at like when a youth kid was crying, he was like great at just like re-navigating the focus of the kids. Cause like they'd be like, oh my God, like, is he dead? And then he was like, hey, look, tennis ball. And they're like, oh, sweet, tennis ball.
The key is just not making it a big deal.
Yeah.
Because they'll match the kids will match your emotions, you know?
I do that with my daughter all the time. She falls and hits her head, and I'm the one to be like, oh my gosh. And my wife's like, oh, stand up, like you're okay. And if I go, oh my gosh, she starts crying. And when my wife goes, oh, you're okay, stand up, she just like moves on to the next thing.
Could you imagine on Sports Center, De'Aaron Fox out for game, strength coach made him play tag?
It's a great training stimulus, but 99% of the population would roast the organization.
Yeah,
exactly. So very, very cool. Some anecdotes in there, but Mike, take it away. What'd you learn from each of your previous spots?
Yeah, I think the UC Davis one I'll make short because we talked about it. Coaching, right? You coach a lot. I got super comfortable on the floor. Like I felt incredibly comfortable on the floor, which was important, you know, because I was a GA and I went to that position and I felt like that was something that I need to get better at, was just feeling like confident about coaching anybody. And I got to that point. And then TCBoost, I would say, just to Hunter's point about the mentorship part, like I learned a ton X and O's wise, you know, and I got way better at everything. for being there. But like the mentorship part, and you should tag Steven this when you post it on Instagram. He won't even listen to it, but you should still tag him. But just like having Steve and like having you and for them just to like make it so concrete that yes, what you do from a coaching standpoint is really important. Like that part is really important. You have to be really, really good at that. But again, like what else are you doing? To the point where it just like became part of my personality now as just a coach and as a person. And I wouldn't have gotten that without having spent time at TCBoost. Right. So that's why I credit TCBoost with being super formative for me because, and that's also part of why like I felt okay taking this job, because like Hunter said, like there's definitely like an ego part, there's definitely a pride part where it's like you do want to kind of climb the ladder, and like I don't know if anyone from Illinois State's can listen to this, but like the Illinois State logo isn't as cool as like the Arizona State logo for sure, So it's like, yeah, like you understand that that part of it isn't the same, but it's like, okay, because my frame of reference now and my mindset is, yes, I want to coach at a really high level. I can do that anywhere. But then also I want to do these things that I want to do with Move the Needle. Like I can do that too. And then from an impact and just being able to work with a group of athletes, like it's no different than if I was at Arizona State or if I was at Northwestern. Like you still have this group of athletes that you can be very impactful to. So really the only thing that's in my mind that's making this an issue is the fact that I have this ego that wants me to be at a school that has this really nice logo. Like none of that stuff actually matters because it still allows me all of the things that are actually important to me. But again, I think part of understanding that was because I had like mentors and people that made that so clear to me where it's like, you don't actually care about the logo. What you care about are being a great coach, doing more, and then being able to have this impact with a group of athletes. And honestly, at the mid-major level, you'll probably have a little bit more consistency than you will at the Power 5 level, just because I feel like Power 5 guys are in and out a little bit more. And mid-major guys are like, hey, I want to come here and I want to develop. I want to be here for 3 to 4 years because only by being somewhere and being consistent for 3 to 4 years will I have a chance to play professional baseball or play whatever. Right. So for me, I think that is the biggest thing I took away from TCBoost. 100% the coaching, great, but also just being able to be around the people that help me kind of guide the direction that I want my career to go in the future.
I think that's a great point to the little bit of a tangent, but great point to comparing and contrasting like mid-major to like a Power 5 level. And a close friend of mine and former guest on the Move the Needle podcast, Matt Aldridge, the basketball guy at Furman University. And that's a mid-major program. And you can say that maybe they don't get the limelight that bigger programs get. Granted, that's a little bit different because of what they did in the NCAA tournament last year, but he's been there for a long time. And I think that a lot of people that are in his position with the success he has had would potentially try to move on and move up. But he's been there for 5 or 6 years now, and he's in a great situation. And he gets guys for 4 to 5 years and gets to develop them. And I think that is, and I don't want to be a grass is always greener person, but that's a really intriguing aspect of working at a mid-major level is you do get to develop people over the course of a career. And I see his position and it's something like that is intriguing to me because yeah, you do get that consistency.
And the opportunity to take some risk, right?
Yeah.
Like to not mess around, but experiment with mid-major athletes versus Power 5, like draft prospects, right? Like the logo's nicer, but the chance to like experiment and talk about things on podcasts, which you couldn't at the pro level, So I think there's pros and cons, but like as you've refined your why, Mike, over the last few years, like this actually makes a ton of sense, So I think it comes back to context of like, well, I'm a father now and I have to like have stability and more money and I want to experience my kid growing up, right? What makes the most sense that satisfies me personally and all of that stuff, right? And as your why has changed, Mike, but also gotten more clear, well, yeah, this makes total sense for sure. So I think super cool to kind of compare and contrast and also like call things how they are, like logos, the level of athlete, like things that are good and bad. It's weird how like we all know it and we'll talk about it, but as soon as like the record button goes on, I just think it's kind of funny.
Well, I think just to follow up on that, like when I was thinking about taking this job, and I had like multiple conversations with Steve about what should I do, because I had multiple job offers, and I was like, they're all different, they're all good. I'm not sure which one's right for me. And one of the jobs that I was thinking of was like a very good financial move for myself. And he was like, dude, like if that's the reason why you're gonna take this job, like it's the stupidest reason I've ever heard in my entire life. Because although like the Illinois State job doesn't pay as much, you're telling me like you can't make money outside of what you're doing for Illinois State. Like you can't create revenue somewhere else. Like you can definitely do that. It's like, okay, well, that's probably true. And that's another thing that makes the success of Move the Needle more urgent, is that, hey, we do want to create some kind of financial, or raise the ceiling of our financial ability too. It's like, whereas you take this job that's like, hey, you're good to go financially completely. It's like, hey, what is the urgency now for Move the Needle? It's like, okay, whatever. And not to say that's how I think about it, but it's like, I'm not going to then allow that part of like college athletics or mid-major to influence why I would take or not take a position. Where again, like, okay, logo, and then typically those Power 5 jobs pay better, right? But it's like, okay, if that's the reason you want to go Power 5, it's probably not a legitimate reason to actually want to go Power 5 when you can get all the things you actually want to get elsewhere.
And with that, like just talking through your why. And I think whether it's on a podcast or networking, I forgot when this came up, but when I'm articulate in my why or just my training philosophies, it's like, well, I ramble for 45 minutes straight on my own, like every other week, right? I've had more networking phone calls in the last 3 years than like someone probably honestly will have in their entire career, you know? So whether it's having really good coworkers, like I said, it's like a feed forward loop, or just business partners, a LLC, whatever it may be, just like talking through it. And maybe like it wasn't even like, obviously it was Steve that said it, but maybe you would say that out loud and be like, yeah, it's for the money. And you're like, oh, wait, like that's kind of stupid, you know? So I think there's so many positives and benefits. So super, super cool. Um, Last question, and this is I'm very excited for this one. Why do you think Destiny kept you at each of your roles besides Hunter hopping jobs every year, 1 year at a time? Why do you think Destiny kept you at each one of your spots as long as it did?
I mean, I would say that the urgency that I felt to move was created by the situation that I was currently in. Maybe that's like obvious, but like for example, when I was at Minnesota State Mankato as a GA, my GA position was coming to an end. So that's urgent. Like you're not gonna have a job. Maybe I could have stuck around for another year, but I didn't want to. So that was urgent. And then when I was at Southeastern Louisiana, it was a part-time role and I didn't have insurance. Me and my wife both turned 26. We were off our parents' insurance, and it began to hit me like, oh wow, if we want to start a family soon, I need to make a little bit more money because it paid next to nothing and we didn't have insurance. Then I was at UC Davis and a baby was on the way. And like I alluded to earlier, the time that I was committing to work and the money that I was making just didn't make sense to me. And then at the Kings, I was giving too much of my time. And I needed to make a change in that way. So I think it was just like the current situation I was in. It just like it lended itself to wanting to make a move. And then when those moves were made was when the next best opportunity presented itself. And I could have been with the Kings, like I said, a year longer, but this opportunity presented itself at a really good time to be able to jump at it. So I feel fortunate for all those opportunities as they presented themselves in the time that they did.
Yeah,
I don't know if I would answer this question. I mean,
He was excited for it, Mike. Come up with something.
I apologize. Let me fabricate something really
I
exciting.
can buy some time for you if you want.
My answer is like going from UC Davis to TCBoost. Part of it was just like personal relationship driven. And then going from TCBoost to Illinois State, part of it was personal relationship driven. I just think that, like, especially at the end of my time at TCBoost, was I'd been thinking about leaving for a little bit.
So
And
like,
not because
yeah. So why did it all that extra time? Like, why was that time there? Yeah.
Partially because I didn't know exactly like where I wanted to, what was better, And it's like there's so many good things about TCBoost. We had complete autonomy. It was good pay. You could explore as much as you want to do outside. It was an engaging job. So it's like, okay, in order for me to leave this, there has to be something even more engaging that I'm going to then pursue. So for me, it was like I just wasn't really positive what that was. Now I had been thinking about, it's like, what would that thing be? What would the thing be that would be engaging enough for me to want to leave a position like this that I really love, enjoy, appreciate, learn from, all that stuff. Um, and I got to the solution that I think that I want to be able to prove to myself that I am the coach that I think that I am now compared to what I was when I was in the collegiate sector before. Because like I said, like I could have stayed private or I could have gone to college and I had to make a decision. And I was like, if I leave now, then I'll just never really know. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, hey, I know I can do this job so much better at so much of a higher level. And that was super engaging to me. That idea was really engaged and super engaging to me. So it became like this. I wasn't really sure where I wanted to apply myself. I thought it might then be college. And then I kind of came to this crossroads where you had to choose, hey, pursue this opportunity. That's a really good opportunity privately, or go back to college and engage in that way and see if that's what you believe in. And, that's what I decided to do. And then with the idea that, like, look, if that went poorly, then it's like, look, I know that I can succeed privately, but I also know that I can succeed in this sector. And I want to see that through a little bit more than I had previously at Davis. So my answer.
And the reason I ask is I'm assuming the listener, if they're thinking about kind of changing sectors or jobs or roles, whatever it is there so many things, or I would guess many times of, oh, why not now? Or whatever it may be. And in the multiple finalist opportunities I had, who's counting at 9, where I got a phone call from whoever was leading the interview process, right? And talk about keeping it real on this podcast. I have screenshots on my phone of them leaving a voicemail saying, hey, call me back. And I was like, is this the call that changes my life? Just to call them back and say, hey, you were great, but XYZ. And it was so interesting where, let's say 6 months at a time, I was going through an interview and reflecting back to what I had learned in all of the time, 6 months from the previous one that I did not get. I'm like, oh, geez, like I learned so much in these 6 months. Thank God if I get this role, I learned all of that in that time frame. And then I wouldn't get it. And then the next interview would come up. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, dude, this last 6 months were so killer. I learned so much, you know? And and I'll keep it real again. Like TCBoost changed my pay structure for the right reasons, and they're totally justified in doing that. And that was that urgency, right? Of like, I couldn't create the urgency myself. And to have bosses that knew me well enough and were connected with me well enough and had, my trust, because there's no truth without the trust, right? Stolen from Steve and Jeremy Boone. And those guys get another shout out, just how you guys shout out me a lot. Like Steve is in every other episode for sure. That when they explained it, I couldn't argue with it, right? It was, this is what we think is best for you. And there's a little bit more urgency that you need to like really pursue getting out of here, right? Because I was half-heartedly doing TCBoost. And then I was like, oh, the pay's good. Like, it's fine, to know, like, you want to get out of here. And it's just more cushy here with the more pay or just the structure that I had. So I think getting clarity in your why and having that actual urgency, right? Because I think, what's at stake, Jeremy Boone's leadership development, like none of this really happens unless you're so clear about the what's at stake. Like what happens if you don't chase what you want to chase? And in this current job, like I really enjoy it and I'm not trying to like leave, but I don't want my brother to intentionally not call me because he knows I'll be busy, you know? And like, I don't want him to have kids and it's like 10 years later and it's like, oh, cool. Like I finally get to meet Uncle Matt, because I have to coach a bunch. Right. So I think, yeah, urgency is a powerful thing, and positive or negative, like clarity in your why can also be urgency as well. But that's kind of what I took away from your stories.
Yeah,
Are you
one
going back
point.
to private? Is that is that what you're saying? Eventually, you're just gonna shift right back over.
Yeah, I think once I scratch my college itch to live wherever I want to live, like my parents are moving out to Iowa as well, where unless University of Iowa baseball, wants to hire me, like
They just hired
maybe
a guy
I
last
do
year,
want to
but
do my own thing. Huh?
They just hired from Illinois State last year.
Hey, so to the chance to like do my own thing and be near a family, like that could be college, it could be private, but eventually like I'll want like family will mean like as I've gotten older, it's meant more to me and it will only increase, you know? So like I have a sticky note on my desk that says a life I can say yes to. Not just, oh, I'll be free, I'll be more free in the summer, right? Like those
Yeah.
moments pass.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one
a
of
good point.
the most intriguing and driving factors for Move the Needle of getting to the point where like there's been so many times where it's like, for example, Leah and Elsie, my wife and daughter, went to Thanksgiving in Minnesota with her family, and I was in Las Vegas for a tournament. There's so many times throughout my like career to this point where it's like family's meeting up and blah blah blah. Leah's gonna go, I'm gonna stay home. And it's like, damn. And don't get me wrong, like the trip to Vegas was great. And I'm not gonna say that like I was disappointed being there, but I also like am excited for the point in my career in life where it's like, hey, in the middle of November, the middle of December, when it's the heart of basketball season, and maybe I'm not working in basketball anymore, it's like, yeah, let's go on that trip. Let's go visit home. Let's go visit our family and be able to have something that like Move the Needle that we can or I can do anywhere. And allow that freedom is really intriguing to me because it's kind of like become known in my family, kind of what you're talking about now with your brother, that my schedule doesn't allow for me to just be able to like go on trips. Like it took so long, especially um, family members in both me and Leah's family to realize that like I don't just have PTO. Like I can't just put in for a week off and leave. And I think that people outside of the coaching profession are like, what? Just take some time off. And it's like, well, you can't like you can do that, but you can't really do that. You know what I mean? So like getting to the point if Move the Needle gets there, maybe it's another role or whatever, to where it's like, yeah, let's do it. We don't even need to worry about it. Let's take that trip. Is something I'm really excited for.
Fantastic. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for your time, your candidness. Honestly, I really enjoyed this, to be a little bit more real and use a platform to like hopefully connect and relate to other people, but also share the stories, lessons, and experiences that like make this field what it is. And hopefully a little bit of clarity or some questions or an opportunity to self-reflect. I think we'll do myself and the listener good. So I appreciate both you guys. And the floor is yours to plug whatever you have to plug. And any last words?
First of all, thanks for having us on. Hunter and I are a package deal, so I appreciate you making sure that we were both
We're
on
becoming
together.
one.
We becoming one. And I think that it's important that people, obviously I believe this because we do this as well, right? But it's like, I think it's important to acknowledge that like it's just not easy to do this, and Hunter and I run our own podcast and we edit our own podcast and we do the social media stuff and we do this program release, and it takes time and it takes effort. And in order to do it at a high level, you have to like really want to do it. So, I don't know, the Talking Shop podcast is 170 episodes in or whatever you're at, so to be able to do it for that long that's awesome. And you should continue to do it. And hopefully you get to 1,000 episodes, but for our actual business, Move the Needle at MTN Perform on social media. We're releasing a podcast every single Wednesday. We release educational content on our Instagram. We do all kinds of things. We have a program out right now. We're looking to release our schedule, speakers, and whatnot for our symposium at the start of the summer. So there's a lot of good stuff happening with Move the Needle that we're super excited about. And like we said, it continues to take up more and more of my time. So all good things that we are looking forward to building on in the future.
But you have all the free time as a bachelor, so it's fine.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I really enjoy like coming on to podcasts, especially having your own, like you alluded to earlier, talking about being a guest as opposed to a host. There's a little bit more or a little bit less pressure that you feel to kind of like run a conversation. So it's nice. But yeah, everything that Move the Needle or about Move the Needle, Mike said. And then I post some stuff on my own
Period.
Instagram
I post
at
some stuff.
at Hunter EIS _ SP. And then I am in the process of writing a book. Will it get released? Hopefully. When it gets released, no idea, but I'm like 30 pages type deep, so it's going pretty well.
Attaboy. Very, very nice. So thank you again, gentlemen, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate it.